just testing if everyone online can hear us. June, Sonia, Karen?
Can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, thanks, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there was a meeting back to back, so we're probably going to start with a couple of minutes delay. Thank you.
I think we can start. Hello, everyone. My name is Emilio Puccio, and I'm the Secretary General of the Intergroup on Children's Rights. I'm very happy to have you guys here, and I'm happy as well for the people who are connected online. Today, we are celebrating the event, Making the DSA Work for Children. We are very excited about the DSA and what actually this entails for children around Europe, and actually, hopefully, even globally. So just for me, a warm welcome on behalf of the Intergroup. We are very happy to organize this event together with the 5 Hours Foundation and our wonderful host, Catharina Rinzema, who is also the Vice Chair of the Intergroup on Children's Rights. Now I'll leave the floor to Andrea Tognoni from the 5 Rights Foundation, who is going to make the introductions. Thanks.
Thank you, Emilio, and thank you, everyone, both in person and online. Since we're already 6 minutes behind schedule, without further ado, I will just pass the floor to Catharina Rinzema. Thanks a lot for hosting us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andre. And I'm really delighted today to host the event organized with the 5 Rights Foundation. So Thank you a lot, Liana, really. And thank you, Matteo, also, but that will be a little bit later. Warm welcome to all of you, both here in the room as well as our online people participating. I think, as you just said to me, Liana, this is an extremely timely event, as the DSA will now be in full swing and will have to be implemented. So we need still a lot of your endurance, your ideas, and think in stamina as well. Because as we all know, digital environment is not designed and regulated with children's safety and protection in mind. And that leaves children extremely vulnerable to a range of risks and harmful content online, including a number of cybercrimes, such as sexual exploitation and abuse, as well as privacy violations, breaches of their personal data. The children's rights violations may have lifelong, irreversible, and even carry transgenerational consequences. Because childhood, I'm a mother myself of a 4-year-old, is such a unique, albeit fragile phase of development, and it needs to be preserved. The role that digital technology plays in children's life is continually expanding. How many hours per day are your children or yourself spending online? Is it more than 3 hours per day? Raise your hand. Yeah, yeah. Oh, guilty as charged. So imagine for the future of our children. And I think in the digital world, often profits prevail. It's an uncomfortable truth that a lot of businesses do not want to mention, but it's true. Profits prevail. And I myself, also being from Renew and a Liberal Party, I'm really pro-business, and I'm also a true believer of business for good. That's why it's essential that we come up with specific rules that prioritize safety. And with the DSA, I think that it is a clear answer that goes in that direction, but we're not there yet. What is the DSA? And what does it offer? It offers a unique set of rules that impose specific due diligence obligations and other obligations on all online service providers to create a safer and more trustworthy online environment. And as we know, it's essentially obliging companies to embed safety by design tools with an entirely rights-based approach. How many businesses are there today present? Yeah, welcome. Yes. Wonderful. Really important that we do this as an alliance together. So thank you both for being here. As we know, 1 in 3 users in the EU is a child, and these children are accessing the internet by a younger age and spending a growing amount of time online. My son is 4 years old. I don't think I'm a very good parent in every aspect, but he has not touched an iPad or an iPhone yet. But I don't know how long I can keep him away from it, because if his peers are using it, you don't want your child to be left out. So how can we find that balance? The situation that children are younger and spending more and more time online really calls for specific rules that take into consideration the particular vulnerabilities of children. Can somebody name perhaps some of these vulnerabilities? Well, then it's a good opportunity, I think, this afternoon to think about and to also express what are these particular vulnerabilities for children. They are consumers. And maybe we don't think about children as consumers, but they are consumers and they're vulnerable consumers. And they're extremely vulnerable to surreptitious techniques of advertisement, which is enormously influencing their behavior and ours as well, I guess. And the DSA, thanks to the work of the European Parliament and also thanks to the work of Emilio and the Children's Rights Intergroup in general, we already included a number of provisions for children's rights. I will make them more specific. I see June indeed nodding. It's Article 14, 25, 34 and 35. So Article 14, 25, 34 and 45. And what do these articles include? Clear obligations for all online services providers to prioritize children's safety in this digital environment. So what does it include? Could anybody name some things? What does it include, these specific provisions? It's not a pop quiz, but they include age verification on adult websites and social networks, parental control tools, child-friendly tools that make it easier for children to report any form of abuse that they experience online. It also includes, and I think this is super important, a specific ban on profiling of children for commercial purposes. Me, myself, I was rapporteur for my political group Renew in the internal markets, so the IMCO committee, which has been the leading committee for the DSA. I was rapporteur on the opinion for the regulation to prevent and combat child sexual abuse. Well, I think a lot of you in the room know how those negotiations went and how tough it was and all the pushback that we received. But what is good about the proposal is that it's lex specialis of the DSA and it replicates its structures. So that means that when the DSA differs to the CSAM regulation when it comes to obligations of the specific type of illegal content, such as the CSAM. And precisely in the light of this horrific material online, the imagery portraying of sexual abuse of children, it's essential to have more stringent rules that ensure the detection of this material and also the swift removal. So as part of my work in this file, I thought I managed to include a clear obligation for online services to perform age verification for adult content. This is Article 6. Unfortunately, I didn't manage, and neither did my colleague Hilde Woutmans, in the framework of the work done by her in Libe Committee, to keep the specific obligations on app stores to perform age verification to prevent children from downloading apps that pose a risk. I think age verification is really essential if we want to prevent the harm. Of course, and this has been the huge debate in not only in Parliament, but in society and in the media as well, it has to be done in a privacy-preserving manner. And I will really want to commend the Spanish Data Protection Authority for developing an app that is actually life-changing. Who has heard of this app that is developed by the Spanish Data Protection Authority? Yeah. Some people in the room, well, good. Look it up, because what it will do, it will allow companies to perform age verification without storing any data on the users and yet still be able to verify the age of the users. So I guess it's indeed possible to have both safety for children and data protection and privacy for users. As we are all gathered here, I think the international community, national governments and lawmakers, we all must take concerted and immediate action to prevent the multiple harms caused to children and society, as well as the proliferation of child sexual material abuse online. Why? Because we have really, all of us have the aim of providing online safety for all the children across the world, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rinzema. Very powerful words. And I will pass the floor immediately to Matteo, who is 12 and will give, I think, a very needed and appreciated perspective from the people that were constantly talking about children, but we perhaps not enough. We don't hear from them enough. So please, Matteo, the floor is yours.
Hello. Today I'll talk to you about what I like about technology, what I don't like, and what I find should be better. I like technology a lot. I really like playing video games, for example, Ballstar, Poki, Roblox, Minecraft, FIFA, and Rocket League. I like watching funny videos on YouTube with challenges, such as the Amp-World influencers or Mr. Beast. I like messaging my friends. I also like being able to search for information about things I am interested in, such as football. I also learn to code and I really like it. What I don't like, how addictive technology is. It's really easy to get obsessed with the gaming. Some of my friends don't want to play anymore with me because they prefer to stay at their home and just play video games online. YouTube is also very addictive. Since I'm in secondary school, I get a Google Chromebook and I need to work online sometimes. And it's really difficult to focus and to not play video games when I'm working on my computer. I don't like at all of the notifications games can sometimes give you, because the games try to get you back to take a prize or win something. I don't like some stuff that comes up, like especially violent stuff or porn. Some of my friends are already from a very young age addicted to porn, and that's really not good. It's also scary how people you don't know can contact you on video games or on apps like WhatsApp. I do have a couple of ideas to make it better. It would be better if internet would be less addictive. Technology should be safe and fun and interesting and help us learn without always distracting us and showing us stuff we don't want to see. It would also be good to make sure school computers would be made to not do anything else other than work on them. And keep everything else separated. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Matteo. I think these are extremely valuable words. And again, thanks a lot. I think it's really important that we listen to children. And before we dwell into the substance with the panels, a last opening word from Leanda Barrington-Leach, the Executive Director of Five Rights Foundation.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Matteo, for being here and sharing a few words about your experience and your thoughts. I think today in this room, I think it's safe to say that we all share the same objective: to make indeed your online experience better, to make digital services, as you said, I think safe, fun, interesting, so that you can also, so they can help you learn and develop. I'd like today just to encourage everyone here and online also to bear in mind that the only meaningful marker of our collective success is practical change to the products and services children use, practical change that makes their lived experience better. I'd also like to encourage everyone, and in particular our panelists, to reflect on what you said also about how games and the technology used in your schooling are central to your world. So how can the Digital Services Act, how will the Digital Services Act deliver for you and for all children? At the Five Rights Foundation, we believe that we are at a turning point. We believe that the DSA has the power to be transformational for children's lived experience, directly affecting many, if not all, of the services that children use. Already, the world is watching. Tech companies are sitting up, some of them here today. Many have made changes already to show goodwill and are now waiting to see what more will be required of them. The innovators and the wannabe next tech giants are watching and listening carefully too. If they read the mood right and they can harness it to their advantage, then the next big break might well be theirs. So yes, there is every reason to be excited, but nothing can be taken for granted. The seed of change for children is solidly planted in the DSA text, but to grow and bear fruit, it will need nourishing. How will its requirements for children be implemented? How will they be enforced? How can we be sure when we look back in a few years' time that the changes made by companies to comply with the DSA have meaningfully improved the lived experience of children? These are the big questions I will leave to our panelists today to answer. But before handing over to them, I would like to draw your attention to the report that I think Manon has just shared, that the Five Rights Foundation has just published on the eve of the DSA coming into full force. So how to ensure a high level of privacy, safety and security for minors, a best practices baseline for the implementation of the Digital Services Act for children. The report, I hope, does what it says on the tin. It sets out the policy and legal framework that and brings together the existing international best practices that should inform the implementation of the DSA. What the report also does is highlight some of the very many voices of many children who have informed these policies and best practices. They know what they want, and there is a clear consensus on what needs to be done to deliver for them. We cannot let them down. So thank you for caring, thank you for coming here today, and thank you for acting.
Thank you, Leanna. So I would say let's jump right to it, to the answers to these many questions that we raised. For the first panel, that we'll be looking at the promises that are, let's say, included in the DSA for children. We are happy to welcome June Lowery-Kingston, head of the Safer Internet unit at the European Commission, joining us online, as the unit is based in Luxembourg. Mieke Schuurman, Director of Child Rights at the Eurochild. Lisa Robinson, responsible for online safety policy at the OECD. And also online, Professor Sonia Livingstone, professor at LSE and director of the Digital Futures for Children Center. So I will start with June with the very introductory question. So what's so special about the DSA for children that is bringing us here today?
Right, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Andrea, for this invitation to speak to you this afternoon. So, what's special about the DSA? Well, obviously we're all here, we all think it's important, but what is different about it? Well, I would argue, and I hope by the end of my few minutes you'll agree with me, that one of the big changes about the DSA is really how, for the first time, I think, it really embeds children's rights and fundamental rights in this legislation. So we have a well-documented human rights foundation. There are more eminent people around the table, the E-table, to speak about that. We have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. Article 24 was already mentioned. And on the back of those, we have the EU Strategy on the Rights of the Child under this Commission 2021, and then our own Better Internet for Kids Plus Strategy 2022. And when we were drawing up those two strategies, it was clear there was lots of legislation that was relevant to children in the online sphere. And there are compendiums that go with both those strategies. But it's like an article here, a word there, a provision there. It's very specific in terms of the nature of the obligations. What I think is really different about the DSA, and I applaud everyone involved in drafting it and getting it as an adopted text, is that for the first time, I think we have fundamental rights as a packet, as something that service providers have to respect, in the same way that we've grown accustomed to having consumer protection at the heart of any law on anything that can be sold, or health and safety in, the working environment, for example. And at Article 1 of the DSA, that's really there right from the start. We've got really 4 elements to it: harmonized rule, a safe, predictable, trustworthy online environment, facilitating innovation, obviously very important within Europe as well, but while effectively protecting fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter. And among the rights, obviously, that are enshrined and that you'll find repeatedly mentioned are rights of the child, but also this repeated wording about the protection of relevant fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter. And I think one of the recitals says explicitly, this regulation should be interpreted and applied in accordance with those fundamental rights. Now, this, I think, is a big difference. And then when we look at the obligations that apply to the very large online platforms and search engines, obviously the most popular in Europe, but actually most of them extremely popular with younger users, we have obviously the Articles 34 and 35 with the obligation of the annual exercise of risk assessment and risk mitigation analysis. And in that context, again, we come back to fundamental rights, which I think is, very, very powerful potentially. The very large online platforms have to analyze systemic risk, and there are 4 minimal categories of systemic risk, 3 of which I think are directly relevant to children. So there's illegal content, there's the exercise of rights, and again, specifically, we're talking about actual or foreseeable negative effects on fundamental rights, with an explicit mention on the rights of the child. Third one is about civic discourse, electoral processes. And then the fourth one, again, explicitly talks about actual or foreseeable negative effects, gender-based violence, protection of public health, protection of minors, and serious negative consequences to the person's physical and mental well-being. And as part of that risk assessment, the firms also should look at whether factors such as the design of their recommender systems or other algorithms and their content moderation systems are relevant to the risks that they're looking at, and also if there is the potential for amplification and potential rapid and wide spreading of illegal content and information that's incompatible with terms and conditions. So exactly as Matteo was saying, the violent content that sometimes spreads like wildfires through classrooms or schools through mobile phones. And so I think if you look then also in terms of the mitigation measures, really the firms are asked to look at their design of their platforms. You know, the list is long in Article 35, but it's looking at terms and conditions, content moderation, adapting design, looking at the algorithms, looking at the recommender systems, and so on and so on. And so I think the potential is genuinely there because of this very different approach in the DSA. That, for example, horrible, violent videos, kitten in a mixer, things like that, that can be so easily downloaded and shared because they've been uploaded to some of the big platforms. That material should become harder to see. And the tragic cases that I think we probably know in every member state across Europe and well beyond, where social media platforms have played a role in pushing young people to the brink by the recommender systems promoting age inappropriate content, whether that's self-harm or suicide or extreme dieting and so on. I think that cycle is really going to be effectively addressed through the DSA. And if the measures that the very large online platforms don't take are not effective, then we have colleagues like a wonderful Prabhat who's sitting beside you, who have measures, who have quite a big stick at European level and at national level as well, to actually force the change that Leander was talking about. So we're optimistic. The words are there. We have to put those words into practice now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, June. So the importance of having a digital policy with fundamental rights at the center, I think we all will agree. And I'm turning now to Eurochild as the perspective of children in a way. Why is it so important from a children's rights perspective to have this digital policy shaped this way?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the question, Andrea. Firstly, I would like to very briefly explain that Eurochild is the leading child rights network working with and for children in Europe. We have 200 members across 42 European countries, including all EU member states. And we work to ensure that children's rights are at the heart of policy making. And we in particular also focus on children affected by poverty and disadvantage. Our work is based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we work very closely with the EU, as protecting children's rights is among the EU's aims and values. So why is a child rights-based approach needed for the DSA to be successful? The DSA is important for all children, as all children need to have equal and safe access to the digital environment. This means that also children growing up in poverty and in marginalized circumstances have a right to access to the digital environment. While online environments bring many benefits for children in terms of development, socialization, and educational opportunities, also mentioned by Matteo, I think, they also create a new set of challenges that need to be tackled. So we believe that the DSA can contribute to a safe online environment for children and complement other actions that children's rights are implemented. So as I'm sure you're all aware, Article 28 of the DSA is an imperative for online service providers and member states to step up the safety by design. However, to ensure the words a high level of privacy, safety, and security of minors, to properly deliver that for children, it needs to be operationalized from a child rights-based approach and needs to be based on the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child. And that needs to take into account the full spectrum of children's rights, which is regarding privacy, protection, participation, and provision rights. They all need to be balanced together. And it also implies promoting age-appropriate experiences instead of excluding them. And it implies putting the best interest of the child at the heart of the design of online services and their policies, such as their terms and conditions. For this, we believe at Eurochild that child rights impact assessments must become part of such operationalization. So as members of the special group of the EU Code of Conduct on Age-Appropriate Design, we believe the code is an opportunity to advance in this direction. So in November, Eurochild published a report on children in need across Europe. I brought a few copies here with the title Political Will or Won't. Its report is based on the assessment provided by 38 Eurochild members across Europe on the situation of children's rights. And these members have also shared the situation on children's rights in the digital environment. And what becomes clear from these members is that children are increasingly at risk online, with disastrous repercussions on their mental health and their general well-being. So, for example, our members in Greece and Latvia, they warned for the increased unregulated addictive features used by online platforms, which ensures the engagement of the user base, including children. Eurochild believes that by putting the responsibility for children's safety and well-being on companies, and by adopting a child rights-based approach, that children will be able to safely access digital services. So the DSA will contribute to a safe online environment for children, and it can hold companies to account for using safety by design method and approach. So we believe that also the role of the digital services coordinators is to monitor whether online platforms use the safety by design approach, taking into account the full spectrum of children's rights. And where needed, they should issue recommendations to ensure children's rights are the basis for companies to develop these digital services. So I would like to briefly mention also the establishment of the Irish Online Safety Commissioner, who is developing safety codes and frameworks, because these frameworks will serve as a guidance for online platforms to comply with national and EU laws and follow child protection regulations. This is of key importance, given that many large online platforms are based in Ireland. But following the Irish example, we believe that as part of the implementation of the DSA, the establishment of well-resourced and legally competent authorities could be scaled up to other national levels. So binding online safety codes are key to guide companies' compliance to children's rights under Article 28 of the DSA. So if we want the DSA to work for children, we must ensure that children's rights are a priority on the digital agenda of the EU. And also the European Parliament Intergroup on Children's Rights could offer an accountability mechanism to make sure the level of attention to children's rights under the DSA is kept up. So to leave it there.
Thank you, Mieke. Let us zoom out, as I think it was mentioned that the DSA, it's key for Europe, but it's hopefully also going to have global repercussions. So I will now turn to Lisa Robinson from the OECD to give a bit of a broader perspective on the DSA. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea, and like Mieke, thank you everyone for the invitation. It's great to be here today. For those of you who don't know much about the OECD, just really briefly, so we're an international organization. We have 38 member countries. We work on lots and lots of stuff. So you might think of the OECD more related to tax or environmental issues or other issues. But I work in the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate, and within that we have a digital policy division and committee. And within that I work on issues related to online safety, and also specifically related to children. So the OECD has been at it in relation to children in the digital environment for quite some while. And our sort of overarching philosophy is looking not just at how do we prevent risks for children online, but also what's good policy to make sure that kids can benefit online as well and reap the benefits. So the title of today's talk is Making the DSA Work for Kids. And you might be all disappointed that I'm actually not going to talk about the DSA. I'll talk around it. like Matteo says, the tech and the online world does lots of things for him. It does some scary things, but it also does things that he likes as well, and that all kids need to access. And so safety really is a little bit of a hygiene issue when we think about the online environment. If we can prioritize safety, then we are allowing kids, most importantly here for this conversation, but also all people to be able to access and benefit from the digital technologies. Safety is also, the DSA is not the only place in the world, or the EU is not the only place in the world concerned about this. Safety is obviously a really big concern of our technologies across the globe. There's laws in Australia, there's laws in Singapore, there's laws in the US. There's a lot of conversation. There might not be any actual laws yet, but there's certainly a lot of conversation. So this is not an isolated issue, and it's not an issue that really the EU can solve alone. So I'm really here just to kind of remind us not to work in bubbles, and to make sure that we collaborate in these conversations. The principles underlying the DSA when it comes to children about prioritizing safety, security, and privacy, I think if you spoke to anyone in any of those jurisdictions that I mentioned, and probably the ones that I left out, they would all agree that those are laudable principles. But if we don't work together in relation to the different countries, and from a global perspective, then we lead ourselves into problems where there might be regulatory fragmentation, there might be different protections for different kids in different regions. And so I really urge all of us here when we're talking about it to make sure that we're looking at this from an international perspective, really recognizing the importance of international collaboration. And I can bang on about this for a while, so I'll stop there and go back to Andrea.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. And indeed, I think, well, we know the online world is definitely global and knows no borders, so it's important to have a global approach. So remaining at that global level, we would like to hear from Sonia Livingstone. Sonia, you were one of the pen holders of General Comment 25 to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So how do you see the DSA contributing to advancing children's rights online globally?
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. Yes, so I speak as somebody who worked on General Comment 25. I'll say something about that in a minute. And we've just started at LSE a research centre called Digital Futures for Children with Five Rights Foundation, and we are really seeking to put the evidence base underneath children's rights in the digital environment, if you like, so that everything that we discuss here and in other spaces where children's rights are being debated is as evidence-based and informed by research as it possibly can be. So I'll build on what Lisa said and other speakers before in pointing out that I think Europe with the DSA has made an astonishing and really brilliant advance. And I think it's made an advance through the DSA, but also through its EU strategy on the rights of the child. And it's the combination that is especially powerful and that I think will take us forward today. But what I learned in both European but also international debates around the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is that there is still a task, I think, which is about understanding as well as about regulation. Because what has brought us to this point, I think, has been an exercise in ensuring that those who work on internet governance and digital service provision really come to understand the perspective of children and a child rights framing, and they haven't always done so. There has been a lot of kind of effort to, as it were, bring children's voices and children's rights and the particular needs of children into debates about internet governance. And the contrary has also been true. I think many child rights advocates for many years have not quite grasped the significance of the digital world and all that it's brought in terms of transforming and reconfiguring children's opportunities and the risks. So it's a European debate, but it's also a matter of bringing together these two different bodies of expertise and advocacy. And one reason that I will emphasize the importance of General Comment 25 is that it really does try to bring those together. It's a 10,000 word guidance on how to realize children's rights in relation to the digital environment. And it was informed by both European insights, but also global insights from many countries and many governments around the world, because we are tackling a global challenge, and the challenge is twofold, as been said. It's both about addressing the risks children face, but also about amplifying and ensuring their opportunities. And the evidence base that I have been most proud of, and I think has been very informative, has been that of the Global Kids Online Network, which I worked on with UNICEF, and has tried to bring together the voices and experiences of children in many countries. So what we do in Europe, or what is done in Europe today, has consequences all around the world, and vice versa. And that's quite a challenge. If we thought the DSA was a challenge, then the global agenda is even more so. But of course, we are dealing with very often global companies, global networks, global markets. It's tempting to see the device in one child's hand, but what's crucial is to recognize the business models and global networks that sit behind that. Often the risks and the opportunities that we're trying to address are also transnational. They are not bounded by nation states. And the solutions are also, potentially something that can be shared. And so I echo the earlier words said about the importance of collaboration, sharing best practice, sharing solutions. What I really learned from working with the Committee on the Rights of the Child on General Comment 25 was we're talking about the rights, but we're also talking about all the tools and measures that child rights advocates have developed over the years. The real importance of child rights impact assessments, of the processes of due diligence that are embedded in a child rights approach, the importance of monitoring and research that accompanies any kind of intervention and change, the importance, as we've heard a little today, but really is so vital, of recognizing the child's perspective, and that children have often very different and sometimes surprising and challenging things to say about how their rights can and should be respected, including in the digital environment. So I think this is a very exciting week for children's rights in the digital environment globally, as well as in Europe, and I really welcome this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sonia. So again, importance of international approach and best practices and solutions and tools for children. Maybe just in the interest of time, have a very quick round of rejoinders here. I'll turn to Mieke first. In terms of children's rights, what do you think are the concrete, also developments that we can expect in terms of maybe of participation as well?
Yeah, so at Eurochild, we actually believe that the DSA is not only working for children, but it also should ensure that children are able to participate both in the implementation and the enforcement of the DSA. So at Eurochild ourselves, we also work very closely with children when implementing and also advocating for children's rights. And because the DSA is not only a tool for the protection of children online, but it can also give them a safe empowerment of children and also including children growing up in vulnerable circumstances. As we all know, children's participation is a core principle of the UNCRC. It's also one of the 6 thematic areas of the EU strategy on the rights of the child, and it's included in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. So it means European policymakers have to listen to children's input and opinions and also take them into account when drafting policies. And this also includes digital policies and laws, and is reinforced by what Sonia also mentioned, the UN General Comment 25 on children's rights in the digital environment. So several of Eurochild's members have involve children in national digital legislation. For example, in Wales, children provided comments on the Welsh Action Plan on Youth Digital Education to adapt to the latest technology and challenges. And we encourage such processes to happen across Europe. We also believe that the work of the European Board of Digital Services, and I know there's more discussion about that later on, that children can also be involved in that board and work together also with the digital service coordinators. Because we believe that children should not only be seen as victims that need to be protected, but as full rights holders. Because child participation and child protection go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. And you need to give them also within the area on online and offline safety, you need to give a voice to children and engage them in that. There's one of the things that I wanted to flag here is raised by one of our members, which is a child helpline. And they flagged that a ban on targeted advertisements to minors is limiting their ability to direct child-friendly advice, counseling, and also commercials about the existence of child helplines to children. So this could be an unwanted effect to children, so that when you ban advertisements to children, that also advertisements that are there to help children and to give them access to child helplines, for example, can no longer happen. So that's something I wanted to share here. To involve children, we need to have properly resourced DSA coordinators, to have sufficient staff and budget to be able to do that, and make sure that that all safety measures are also in place. We have recently worked with quite a few other organizations, children's organizations here in Europe, to prepare for the European Parliament elections, which are on its way. And we asked children about what they want for Europe. I can give you already a small sneak preview, because 67% of children like to learn digital skills at schools. And also they like to have better rules for online spaces. So that's some of the outcomes, and all of the outcomes will be shared here in the European Parliament on the 21st of March. And I also wanted to share that we work with ECPAT and Terre des Hommes, and we have consulted over 450 children in child focus group discussions, so really quality discussions in 15 countries. And also we asked 6,500 caregivers on online safety. And these results will be published on the 8th of April. But one of the preliminary results from these consultations is that children prefer online safety features that promote their agency as users. So this agency can only be ensured in a safe way through safety by design, and meaningfully involve children in the design of the platforms and safety features. So for example, Child from Malta in this consultation said, when discussing about the problems and the solutions, apps need to have a more accessible way to secure accounts. So to come back to your question, Andrea, at the beginning, the Digital Services Act, with the Digital Services Act, governments have the opportunity to hold tech companies and online platforms accountable and ensure the implementation of safety by design, with at the same time involving children in these processes.
Thank you, Mieke. Keeping the focus on this, the need to balance, this inclusion and the different provisions that the DSA has on children. I will turn maybe to Sonia if she wants to very briefly comment on this basic hygiene, I think you call it, level of safety and security, as well as the other children's rights that need to be catered.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in the Digital Futures Commission, we've started really talking about child rights by design. Of course, we want safety by design, privacy by design, security by design, but a safe, private, secure child is actually not. It's vital, but it's not enough. And there's also children's the importance of agency, of being consulted, of participating in their civil rights and liberties, as Mieke just eloquently set out. So what's so crucial about a child rights approach is it's holistic. The rights are indivisible, they are interdependent. And I think this matters both for how we regard children and also what we expect of companies. If we call on the hygiene factors alone, they may decide, this is just, it's easier to address children's rights by just excluding them from the service, by withdrawing the options for them, because they're expensive and they're difficult, as is often said. So I think that, the challenge is really to think about, and I don't know if this is possible within the DSA, to think about risk assessment not only as the risks to children's personal safety, but the risks to their rights read holistically, so that we keep in mind the risk to all their rights, including their rights of inclusion, access and participation.
Thank you, Sonia. That was very effective and very brief and very powerful. On the tools to achieve this and to advance this agenda, I would just ask maybe June if she wants to comment more on the work of her unit and concretely what are the further steps that are being taken, noting that we will hear more about that from Prabhat later.
No, you have the real expert sitting next to you. So very briefly, I agree with really what the previous speakers have said, this need for cooperation, for looking at this really across the board. And also we're in touch with obviously not just member states, but also other colleagues, in Australia or UK tackling the same problems as Sonia and the others outlined. One recent experience we've had, which I think was very positive and I think is a good sign, is that just last week we brought together some of the digital service coordinators, our Safer Internet centres, a network of helplines, hotlines and awareness raising centres across Europe, with young people and also with teachers or headmasters, headmistresses from the sort of formal educational environment. Because I think for the DSA to really be a success, we've heard what potential it's got. We really need to make it work in practice to make people, children, families, teachers aware of their rights, so that when they're confronted with difficult situations, whether it's in the classroom or in the home, that they know who to turn to and they know what action should follow from reporting something. And I think that's a big task that lies ahead of us, but obviously it's not just on us or my unit or even on the Safer Internet centres. We really all have to work on that. Member states, civic society and the firms themselves. DSA itself also mentions awareness raising as one of the risk mitigation factors. Yes, so we really need to get that out. One of the things that we have done just to try and raise awareness is that we have a little brochure in child-friendly language developed with young people, which really tries to point out the key elements of the DSA as it affects young users. And that's, I think, one example of how we really want to help children as well as families and schools to realise the opportunities and the potential of the DSA, because of easier reporting channels, trusted flaggers, better terms and conditions, more easily to understand, the whole transparency agenda, which is there for researchers like Sonia and her colleagues, that we can together make all the opportunities of the DSA actually bring about change. Probably enough from me for now. Thanks.
Thank you, June. And so staying on the tools, I will, before we dwell into the actual enforcement and more detail about the DSA, I will just turn to Lisa. Very briefly, you mentioned the OECD ongoing work on safety by design. Can you explain a bit more what you're doing and how that can help?
Yes, that's working. Yes, absolutely. So our work on safety by design goes back a little bit to the comments I made before, and I think Sonia also made in relation to the importance of cooperation and working together and not working in silos. Pardon me. So we have a current project on safety by design. We anticipate having a report come out in the summer this year, which hopefully will be of use to all of you. And quite a few people around the room are our experts who have helped us inform this report and helped us in a conference last year as well. So thank you to them. Look, just very quickly, the reason we decided to work on safety by design, we've heard the word safety by design a lot already this morning. It's in a bunch of international guidance documents, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, including in our own recommendation, including coming from the ITU, the Council of Europe, in lots of places. And we hear calls for safety by design, but that doesn't necessarily explain exactly what that is and how you would implement it. And so that's what we're trying to do at the OECD. We're trying to pull together the different international aspects, the different international guidance that's calling for safety by design, and really draw out what that means. And those are some of the things that we've already talked about, called for in some of those guidance documents, such as transparency, accountability. Also looking at what's happening on a national level, or at a national level in relation to how is safety by design making its way into all this new legislation that we're seeing. And again, things that we've talked about today, such as age verification, again, transparency, different tools are some of the things that we're seeing as well. So it's not a finished piece of work, so I can't really go into findings in detail, but it is also another example of how we're all kind of all calling for the one thing in this space, but then maybe we're all doing it a little bit differently. And so if we can work together and try and see through the fog, then hopefully it's better for everyone working on this and better for kids in the long run.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. And I think we all look forward to reading that report before the summer or during the summer. Who knows? We'll see. Thanks a lot to all the panelists. We're now rushing to the second panel of the event, for which we have Ms. Kim van Sparentak, member of the IMCO committee, as well as rapporteur of the addictive design report of the European Parliament, which I'm sure everyone has read carefully. Ursula Pachl, I hope that's more or less a correct pronunciation, Deputy Director General of BEUC. Prabhat Agarwal, again, hope the pronunciation is right, head of the unit in the European Commission, the DSA unit. And lastly, online, we're joined by Karen McAuley from the Coimisiún, Meán, who will be responsible for the DSA in Ireland next, as of Saturday, I believe. So welcome and thank you. Let me start with Prabhat. I think you're receiving a lot of requests in this period. So comes Saturday, what will you have ready? What will you still have to do? What happens?
Yes, thank you very much, Andrea, and thanks to all the colleagues for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Of course, there's much that is going on in our area of work right now, and if I may seem distracted, it's because there is indeed a lot happening in the background at the moment, not only in the area of our discussion today, but also in the wider setup. So on the 17th of February, the official full entry into application of the DSA 2024 is just around the corner. So it's a very timely moment to be speaking on what has been done. I think I'd like to start, and I don't want to speak too long because I know you're interested in what I might have to say about the work we'll be doing on protection of minors. Of course, in very, very close cooperation with June and her team, and it's been a real asset for us to have in-house expertise like the one that June has, including her network, kind of at our immediate, not only disposal, but working really in very close coordination and cooperation with deep integrated teams going along. But it's just worth for 1 second to step back. I mean, because the DSA was proposed along the Digital Markets Act on the 15th of December 2020. So it was just after a series of 3 lockdowns, and these 3 lockdowns in Belgium at least had particularly affected many children and many minors. I have 3 teenagers myself, and I remember that one of the opportunities I took when we were preparing and in fact indeed writing the impact assessment and the text of the digital services itself was that I spent quite a lot of time watching my kids on their mobile devices. So my now 16-year-old, then 14-year-old was a heavy user of TikTok. And, I'm no shame to admit that at that stage, I was a little bit less familiar with this particular service. So I used the opportunity to just ask her to put her screen onto the big television, you know, screencast her, and just to spend some hours of the lockdown to watch what she was actually doing and or watching or going through. So lots of, and I remember this 18th of March was the first day of the lockdown in Belgium 2020. And this must have been the weekend after, so the 20th of March or so. And it was an eye-opener, of course. It was an eye-opener because, first of all, you know, there was my prejudice of kind of really trashy content was not as bad as I had imagined it to be. And so she was receiving quite a lot of information about kind of climate protests, which was a cause that she's very engaged in. And where she claimed that it was difficult to find alternative sources of information through her other networks, you know, like the particularly during the lockdown. I mean, there were the usual expected dance videos as well. And there was actually a surprising amount of interaction going on. So it wasn't just a kind of a passive consumption of an endless stream of videos, but you know, there were forms of interactions which were at that stage new to me. So all this to just say that that it was clear just from watching, and we repeated these sessions also with my other children throughout the lockdown and on other services that I then learned to appreciate more, I think, over this period of time. But what did I learn from the early stages? And this was prior to actually drafting and negotiating the DSA, and of course in the final form, as many have said, thanks to particularly the insistence of the Parliament, is much stronger in terms of protection of minors than the Commission proposal was. But what I learned in those days were exactly many of the things that were said today here. So it's not only about restrictions for the children; it's also about empowerment, particularly when it comes to getting help online. You know, so when getting help centers and getting access to knowledge and reliable information, particularly for young girls who I think are very easily a victim of online harassment. And this is also borne out by data that we have collected together with colleagues from DG Justice. I think this is not a surprise to anyone. But the one point that came out very early was that it's not only about kind of deleting or takedowns or restrictions of access to service, but it's also about ways of getting help. Actually, this made itself into the text, and in one of the mitigation measures speaks specifically about getting support as well. Second element, which was obvious from the beginning, was that the algorithmic system of these services is really a key design feature. So it is a service such as TikTok, but it's similar on others, Instagram or Snap as well. You know, these are essentially algorithmic systems, and where the recommender system is really at the heart of the service. It's not just a kind of an add-on that you can kind of use or not use or something like that. It's really a kind of key feature of this, and this is why in Article 34 and also 35 of the Digital Services Act we emphasize the importance of recommender systems as amplifiers and as a key component of the risk assessment so heavily. And we made also the link to advertising, because of course on some of these services what is served is not only content but also advertising. It's not always the case. And different platforms have different exposures and different reliance on advertising as part of their business model. So this is something that we analyzed, and at that time of in the phase of the project, I was also in charge of the Digital Markets Act, and we did a very in-depth analysis at the time of the advertising business models of several of the platforms that are now designated under the Digital Markets Act as well. So we were the same at the time. It was very much the same team, and so we had the benefit of being able to look at across these things. So this is the second one. This is the point, a little bit the history of the. So my first point was that we were working really very closely with June in a sizable team. My second point was that the child's right approach was really built into the DSA from the get-go. And my third point, I'll be brief now because I think that we have many interesting speakers, come out, is that now, of course, we're turning into enforcement of the Digital Services Act. And I think this is really a new phase. And in fact, we have to give effect to the rights that are in the Digital Services Act, but we also have to give effect to the restrictions that are in the coercive restrictions that are in the Digital Services Act. And I think it's very important to stress that this is a different part of the policy cycle that, and it comes with a very different approach. So now enforcing these rights, meaning giving life to these rights, requires a couple of ingredients that are really very important. So first, it requires an in-depth knowledge of the service that we're talking about. We are working service by service and not groups of service by service. So because every service is different, has a different particular risk profile, has a different exposure to children, and therefore we need to take every service in its own right. Every recommender system is different, has different parameters that amplify or de-amplify content, and in fact, also fair to say that then there's no service that has just one recommender system. So services, depending on which one we're talking about, have between 10 and 20 or more different recommender systems, depending on which service we are. So that's a nuance that we are really taking into account. And then finally, of course, we need now to understand more clearly what is the world that we would like to see that's different, and how does that work? What is a better system, and what is a system that's more compliant with the rules in the DSA, And so one of the things, and I'm very pleased to have the report from the Five Rights Foundation here now, which is mirroring, of course, the work that we've been doing on and giving meaning to the words in Article 28, but also words in Article 34 and 35 on a high level of privacy, safety, and security, or what it means to have particular rights. Now, we sometimes hear from certain quarters that these words are very vague and they're kind of very broad terms, But I think that's a very narrow view. I think the other side of the coin is that that it means that these provisions are also specifying a set of principles that can be enforced by the regulator, and that are actually, in a way, they're more future-proof, because rather than being hyper-specific about a particular problem that we might see today, we've already heard from the experts in the room in the previous discussions that we're talking about a wide variety of different issues here, and it would not do justice to the complexity of the issues if we were now to have a very narrow set of very highly prescriptive rules that might make it easier to comply with, but ultimately constrain the regulator and lead to less effective outcomes of our work. So I'll stop here, and I think that we'll have time for a discussion on more concrete elements, but thank you very much for having us here.
Thank you, Prabhat. And indeed, as we really want to keep the discussion going from one enforcer to one soon to be officially an enforcer, Karen, can you tell us about the work that the Commission has been doing to prepare, and what do you think are the key drivers to make the DSA a success from a national perspective?
Good afternoon, everybody from Dublin, and thank you, Andrea, to you and your colleagues for the invitation to take part in today's important event, and it is an important event. I might just briefly introduce Coimisiún Meán. I don't want to presume that everyone is familiar with us, as we're a relatively new body. Coimisiún Meán is a new regulator for broadcasters and online media here in Ireland, and we were established last March. In addition to carrying out the previous functions of the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, as some of you will know, our remit now includes regulating how online platforms based in Ireland deal with illegal and harmful content. I suppose in view of this remit and our role as Ireland's Digital Services Coordinator, our 5-person commission includes our Digital Services Commissioner and our Online Safety Commissioner. And it may be worth mentioning that national legislation to make on Coimisiún, Ireland's Digital Services Coordinator, was signed into law earlier this week. As regards preparation, since March of last year, Coimisiún has been putting in place, I suppose, the building blocks of effective regulation. Our staff numbers have grown from 40 to 90, and we expect to reach 160 this summer. We've put in place a divisional structure within Coimisiún and Meán that includes a platform supervision and investigations division, a user support division, a regulatory policy division, as well as data and technology and legal services divisions. We've put and started to put helpful information, what we hope is helpful information, on our website about online safety and how to make complaints to platforms and seek support in relation to harmful and illegal content. And from next Monday, we'll have open a contact centre so people can get in touch to learn more about their rights and to get support. I suppose as regards effective implementation of the DSA, I might just focus on two core components, Andrea. The first, and it's been raised already by a number of contributors to today's discussion, is coordination. As you know, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child published a general comment some 20 years ago about general measures to implement the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So it was a general comment really about the verbs, the doing words of the Convention. And it's notable, I think, that the UN Committee identified effective coordination and corresponding cooperation and collaboration as one of the main general measures that need to be pursued to implement children's rights under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to make children's rights real in their daily lives. Coimisiún is responsible for regulating services which have their EU headquarters here in Ireland. Meanwhile, the European Commission, for example, as we know, has a leading role in relation to the supervision of the very large online platforms, the very large online service engines. So cooperating with the European Commission, with our counterparts across Europe, through EU networks, and indeed around the world through the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, is something we regard as really, really important. We're committed to playing an active and constructive role as a member of the European Board for Digital Services, which is obviously going to be a key mechanism to support effective coordination and cooperation in relation to matters covered by the DSA and its application going forward. As regards our draft online safety code, we intend for the final code to be part of our overall online safety framework alongside the DSA. And it may be helpful just to note that some of the provisions for our draft code that went for public consultation align directly with measures in the DSA to protect children. So just briefly, by example, our draft code prohibits the processing of children's personal data for commercial purposes, and it includes many of the risk mitigation measures described in Article 35 of the DSA. So adaptation of terms and conditions, age verification, parental controls, and so on. I suppose overall, I'd like to say that we want to implement this framework in a cohesive and consistent way, and to drive the changes we want to see without placing undue additional or duplicative regulatory burdens on industry, or indeed without generating confusion for users about their rights having regard to the different instruments. A second component, and again it's been referenced by others already today, which we consider very important, is engagement and consultation. Public consultation with stakeholders has been a very important part of our work to develop our code. Last year, we did a call for inputs to seek input from the public and other parties on how we should develop our first online safety code. And following that, we recently concluded a public consultation on our draft code. We've received 1,300 responses to that by the closing date at the end of January, and we're now considering those. But I suppose overall, what we're finding is this consultative approach, hearing the views, concerns, and ideas of different parties, is a really important part of our work to try to develop an effective code. Within that, if I can just briefly say, engaging with young people is a vital part of this process. A priority for us as a commission and our online safety commissioner during our first year of operation has been establishing a youth advisory committee made up of young people and their representative organisations. We first met with this committee at the end of last year, and we consulted with them in person on our draft online safety code in January. And this is work we're looking to develop and build on during the course of this year. More generally, in taking into account Article 24 of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, which recognises children's right to be heard, I'd suggest that to make the DSA work for children, it's going to be really important as we continue this work to hear and learn from children and young people's experiences, perspectives and ideas. And just maybe one brief final point around engagement is about engagement with and by industry. I suppose among the learnings emerging from Coimisiún na Meán's work to prepare for the DSA becoming fully applicable at the end of this week is the importance of engagement with and by industry. We've seen the value of us proactively identifying and engaging with firms so that they know what's expected, but equally important is that proactive participation and engagement by industry, including actions directed towards baking in safety from the beginning and by design. So I might leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Very dense and insightful perspective. So coordination, clarity of rules and codes, and engagement and cooperation with the institutions and children. I will turn maybe to Ursula now in terms of well, an organization that has a lot of experience in enforcement of consumers law, at least, but not only. What do you think will make the DSA deliver in terms of its enforcement for children?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks again for this invitation, a very timely event, and thank you very much also for, to the Five Rights Organization to really put this on the agenda and to remind us of the importance of improving the protection of children online. There is a noise.
Sorry, Karen, I think
Oh, sorry.
not...
Apologies.
Okay, thanks. So maybe just to say, I'm not going to talk indeed so much about substantive rules in the DSA. I'm really talking about more the measures and the tools, starting from our experience as our organization is acknowledged, so to speak, as making complaints, so-called external alerts under consumer law. We do that on infringements that, from our perspective, have a European dimension. And otherwise, we do, for example, GDPR complaints in a way that we coordinate our members' activities in different jurisdictions against certain, in certain cases. But let me also just hook on to, I think, what Mrs. Rinzema said in the beginning, that, of course, children are consumers. And, of course, we all agree they should not be manipulated, they should not be exploited, they should not be tracked, they should be respected in their rights and also in their development. And the issues that we normally work upon, like commercial surveillance, like manipulative design, like addictive design, and I would really like to compliment Mrs. Barrington because we need more initiatives like this, like what the Parliament did in relation to addictive design. So these are then especially grave when it comes to children, and I think we all have to realize that. And let me maybe also say that I think European law and maybe European decision makers and we have a little bit neglected the protection of children in the past. We have a very big acquis of European legislation in place, and we have now a lot of digital legislation that has been adopted in the past few years, which is excellent. But again, the dimension of the protection of children, I think, is not yet as big as it should be. And I think that this will be a really important topic for the next European Commission, for the next European Parliament to work and put these needs of better protection in the online environment in the center stage. And this is not only true now with regards to platform regulation, where we have now the DSA that has a big potential. I think we have an issue with the GDPR here. Consumer protection is also GDPR, but the children protection is not very developed in the GDPR. In consumer law, we have, I think, one single article, which is particularly taken into consideration the protection of vulnerable groups, including children. So this is just not good enough. And maybe also before we come to measures, let me also think that one thing which we certainly need, particularly from companies, is an ethic of compliance. We have not seen that, I think, from the big tech. We have not seen the commitment that we need. We have not had a very good experience with the GDPR compliance, not talking about GDPR enforcement, but a culture of compliance and an ethic of compliance. I think this is also what we need more, particularly when it comes to protecting minors. Coming now to the specific elements of the DSA, which indeed it has a big potential. We really think this will be important now to look at the implementation and the enforcement. Let me just go through a few of these elements. So first, what is important, setting the scene, right? What we really need is that the member states set up their digital service coordinators, and I'm very happy to hear that Ireland plans now to have 160 staff authority to really dealing with that. I have to make a little deviation, say there is a little anecdote, because when we did a complaint on consumer law against TikTok several years ago, we discovered, because we did in-house testing, that very quickly minors were exposed to inappropriate content. So you set up an account and within a few minutes you had inappropriate content. That was not our specialty, but we said, okay, there is the audio visual media directive, we're going to complain about this to Ireland. And the fact was that Ireland had not transposed yet the reviewed audiovisual media service directive, which has an obligation on member states to have measures for video sharing platforms to prevent this. And there was nobody to complain to. And we wrote to the network of these authorities for audiovisual media services, and they didn't have powers to do nothing. So this is the situation a few years ago. Now we have the DSA, and I'm really very excited to hear that this is a very, very strong authority that you're building up there, because we will need it. Now, that was for the member states. We know that there are delays in member states not having the coordinators in place yet, but again, it is very important. The Commission is also doing their job there to, let me say, encourage the national authorities to be built. Authorities must definitely cooperate very closely. And I think that's also what we heard from several speakers and also from Karine now. We also think that it will really be important to have working groups and task forces at the European board of the digital service coordinators, particularly on children protection, on consumer protection, because these are very different types of authorities. Some authorities are telecommunication authorities, others are consumer protection authorities, so they may not have the necessary expertise, they may not have the necessary knowledge, so working together will be the essence of success. And we hope the Commission will build up these working groups, whatever. And of course, importantly, the other level is then the Commission itself for their exclusive powers of enforcement for the very large platforms and search engines. And here I have to say, we're pleased to see that you're setting a high standard, because this is indeed important. In the very beginning, Commission has to come with an ambition to have a high standard of protection. And so we see that you're actively going and requesting information from certain FLOPs and FLOCs to have greater, so that you have greater expectation of what you see being delivered now. So on risk assessment and risk mitigation, standard of protection has to be high from the start. And then what do we need else? You spoke about general principles in the law, in particularly in relation to Article 28, high level of security, of safety, of privacy, of data protection. We know that from consumer law, and we think these levels of high-level principles are very important, because they are flexible, they are future-proof, they can be interpreted, they can be applied, but you need to give flesh to them. And that can be by guidance, so really encourage the Commission to come up with the guidance on protection of minors. That will be really important. And you can do it with standardization, and we also welcome that. I have to make a little side remark here, because we think that in the light of the increasing request to do standardization on the European standardization bodies, we think that the governance of these standardization bodies is not really fit for purpose, because we don't have sufficient civil society representation. Inclusiveness is an issue. We need the expertise, we need the attitude, we need the knowledge in these standardization bodies in order to make them deliver, because fundamental rights protection is very important. But you cannot ask these bodies, which are dominated by businesses, let's face it, by profit thinking, I mean, that's natural for a business, that they are taking care of interpreting how fundamental rights must be implemented and used and applied in order to protect minors. That does not work. So there is a bigger work to do for the next Commission. So we are already asking for that, and we hope that there will be support in the European Parliament. I think I have already been long. Let me make one last point, which is from public enforcement to what we call private enforcement. So that means complaints. How are the complaints procedure usable for people? We know that there is an obligation on the platforms to have that in place. They must be easily accessible. There must be responses within time. So this will be really important. And last point, collective interest representation and collective enforcement through civil society, through consumer organizations. We have the Representative Action Directive, and the DSA was the first directive that from the beginning, from the proposal on, had also foreseen that there could be collective actions against infringements. And that is not only compensation for damage, it's also injunctions to stop illegal behavior of these traders. So we need strong civil society to make sure that private enforcement complements public enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ursula. So standards, guidelines, prioritization of children, resources for the DSCs and channels for the complaints, and an ethic of compliance. Much more in there, but I think that it was very good outline of how we make the DSA a success. We've mentioned recommender systems, addictive design, design of service, the business model behind how the services work. So let me ask just Kim to intervene on that, especially in light of her last report. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, so one of the things that we decided to do in the Internal Market Committee is indeed focus on the design of online services, but also of mobile devices, because we saw that after the work on the DSA, there was still a legislative gap there. Of course, the DSA is very much on content, on what can be seen and what not, how are things disseminated, but of course, the design of how these services are made is also very much on what kind of tricks are being used to make sure you stay glued to your screens. And especially when you look at the effects that all these little addictive tricks have on children, on their development, on their brain development, on the probability that they will develop, for example, an anxiety disorder, it's actually quite shocking. And we now have children that have for the first time grown up always with a smartphone around, and it's worrying. We're seeing that it has a negative impact also on mental health of youth and teenagers. So more needs to be done, and that's why we really delved into the addictive design topic. And one of the things, of course, and I think Prabhat already mentioned it, is the algorithm. The algorithm is, of course, the core of a lot of the big platforms. And the standard algorithm right now is the hyper-personalized algorithm based on clicks and interaction. And that's the one that keeps you glued to your screen the most, because in the end, it shows you the most extreme content. And several experts have coined this algorithm as heroin for children. The TikTok algorithm is like heroin for children, because you get all the dopamine, you get all the inputs all the time, and you just want to stay online. If it's not that these kids are glued to their phone to learn something, they're there to maybe enjoy, but in the end, these platforms only want these kids to stay online to sell more ads. That's the only thing they're doing. So it's actually quite a problematic way of abusing the time of these children, as we call it in the attention economy, just for profit. Meanwhile, knowing that the content they are seeing becomes more and more extreme to keep them glued to their phones, with all the devastating impact that it can have on your mental health or on, for example, the security you feel in your society. So one of the things that we worked on in the report is really targeting these algorithms as an addition, basically, to what we did in the DSA already, to really demand that these personalized, hyper-personalized algorithms based on clicks and interaction really should be turned off by default, and not only having an alternative as set in the DSA. And next to that, we also have given strong recommendations to the Commission to look further in how can we make sure that the consumer protection of people online gets improved. For example, by looking at the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, making sure that we there look at maybe grey listing or blacklisting. So blacklisting, for the people who are not completely into this, blacklisting means banning. Grey listing, first, you have to prove as a company that it's not harmful to actually put something on the market. And I think these are the ways that we really have to look now at making sure that we keep kids safe online. And that is basically, there's such an information asymmetry. These big platforms have so much knowledge also and they know perfectly how these algorithms affect the brains of our children, the attention span of our children. We have to make sure that we reverse the burden of proof. We have to make sure that these platforms, start making things ethical by design, non-addictive by design, and make sure that they can prove that they're not harming our kids and also not us, because also we are in the end also addicted to our phones nowadays. You know, and with children we see the worst impact on their development, but in the end we also see adults with big problems, for example, just being addicted to their phones. So this is really the way I think we should go forward, and I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kim. So very concrete, I think, ideas to bring this forward. Maybe I'll just give the floor very briefly to Prabhat with maybe a too direct question. Are, let's say, guidelines on children coming out soon, or what should company or what can companies look at to comply as of Saturday, let's say?
So we haven't completely decided on the timing and the scope of the guidelines. So there's not much I can really confirm here at this particular point. You know, I mean, I wrote the sentence on the guidelines myself, so I know why I put it there. You know, so it's because when we negotiated the article, we knew that we needed additional specifications. You know, so I think this is a conversation which also, and the article, paragraph 4 says that the board needs to be involved. So on Monday, the board will constitute itself. So it will be one of the areas that we will discuss early on. But at this point, I mean, there's no firm decision on the timing of these guidelines. I think just the fact that we receive input material spontaneously by coming to the parliament is already a good sign. You know, so that is certainly something that we. One thing I can say, and I think that this is perhaps also not surprising for those who have been you know, combing our request for information, is that protection of minors will be an enforcement priority for the Commission. I think that that's something that is I think more or less self-evident also from people who've been following the area, but it is an area that we will look with priority in it. And of course, this goes beyond the construction of guidelines. This goes also to the areas that Kim just mentioned. So we will be taking this seriously. I think maybe just to, because many of you know me, because we've been working on it, I just want to say, not to downplay it actually, but the enforcement stage is very it needs to be done very meticulously. And there is just also, and this is also even different because when you, in the Commission, you work on an impact assessment at the beginning, you kind of explain different options for a law and things that you keep in and keep out. And that's already a high barrier, you know. So, I mean, I've been many times in front of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, and I can tell you it's a really tough examination. It's worse than school or university, you know, and so, and you really have faced very, very tough questions in board on why you did it like this and not the other way, and so on, you know, and if you fail at the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, you know, you get angry phone calls from management and the commissioner and so on, you know, so it's a tough exam, but the data density that's necessary for high quality enforcement is 100 to 1,000 times higher than what you need for an impact assessment, because in an impact assessment you regulate a whole area, you know, a category of different services, you know, whereas when you enforce, you have to look what is specifically wrong here in this particular setting. And one of the challenges, of course, that we have also is that for platforms, it's very easy to make quick changes, you know. So while you're trying to figure out what's going on, you know, the speed at which the service changes is actually very high as well. So the window in which you are actually observing or monitoring compliance can sometimes be very short, you know. So this is different if you look at the energy sector or you know, I don't know, the food sector and so on, when people don't, or the car engines or something, you know, that don't change so quickly. So here, you know, Kim just mentioned some changes to the algorithm. Some of these changes are happening all the time, you know, and we often probably don't even know because it's being A/B tested all the time, being implemented. So the regulated object is also fast moving and evolving very quickly. So the baseline from which you're regulating keeps changing, and for enforcement, this makes it very tricky. So we are doing it with priority. We're doing it in cooperation with children through the cooperation with June that was already mentioned. We're doing it with member states. We're certainly doing it with civil society, and we've had many meetings with the experts who are here. We welcome all of the input. This is not something that I or my team can do alone, no way. This is way too complicated, way too important also. We need to do it with the kids, and we welcome all good ideas, including many good ideas that are in the report on how to make it effective. So this is where I would leave it.
Thank you. I think it's a very good note to end, knowing that the children will remain a priority for enforcement. We are at time, unfortunately. I know we could stay much longer. Thanks a lot to all the panelists, and thanks a lot to Matteo for... Thanks a lot to all the panelists and to Matteo, especially for enduring this whole conversation as a real. And I will give maybe the floor to Emilio for a closing remark.
Thank you, Andrea. I would like to thank each and every one of you who actually participated today, those who attended also, well, physically, as well as those who attended online, and especially our speakers and panelists for sharing such powerful and thoughtful contribution. So I think we can see that today there's been a huge enthusiasm around the DSA, which I also share. And I think it's actually also fair to say the DSA is a groundbreaking piece of legislation, which has set some unique precedent worldwide. I agree with Lisa, there are actually plenty of other jurisdictions in the world who have done it, but maybe just because I'm a very fan of the European Union, I guess like with our 450 million people, which are actually representing also a consistent market share of those very large platforms and search engine, I think it's actually also fair to say that the likelihood for us to do a trickle-down effect across other jurisdictions is pretty high. So I think it's also, as June and Catharina said in their contributions as well, it's also true that this legislation is entirely rights-based, which is already a great first step, I must say. I think it's also great to say today that the Digital Services Act imposes as well a paradigm shift in this ecosystem, because in fact, and Kim was actually mentioning it briefly, that we are shifting the burden of the proof from the victims onto the online companies themselves. And so it's actually important to say that this clearly creates a defined service provider's responsibility. It is also kind of a way to ensure that the companies themselves take their share of responsibilities and then they contribute actively. And again, not the victims themselves. And there is also the possibility to intervene in case of non-compliance, which is also very good to mention. I think also the good thing about the Digital Services Act is that it's somehow shaken the very foundation of the business model of those very, very large online platforms, because as Kim already said, those are designed to increase visualization, be it through likes, be it through other kinds of social interaction engagements, sometimes even worse with those very addictive and predictive algorithms. And so I think it's also important to say that there is a huge amount of data that is in fact processed by those very large online platforms. And this also comes with a lot of risks in the sense that this amount of data can actually then be monetized. It generates an enormous amount of profits. And again, I don't want to have a demonic or like a very dystopian reality against the business companies. I also myself believe in business for good. But because I also think that, this was unpredicted, in fact. We did not know. The internet was not conceived having children in mind, as Catharina said in the introduction. And I think the act created unintended social distortion, but they need to be corrected somehow. I just wanted to conclude to say that I'm particularly concerned, actually very happy that Kim also mentioned about the impact that social media has on mental health of children, and the great consequence it has on their neurobiological development itself. Many scientists have been warning us over the last few years about the so-called neuro rights. By that, I mean those human rights specifically aimed at protecting the brain and its activity. I mean, the brain of a child is developing up until actually, well, technically it's not going to be a child anymore, but like up until 25. So you see how enormous can be the consequences if we do not intervene with an important set of rules. And to conclude, again, I started by saying that I share the enthusiasm of the DSA, I really do, but I think it's also important to say that, of course, legislation alone is not enough. And as much as this legislation is actually very good and strong, it can't really be as comprehensive as to include all the new threats and new risks that are always given the intrinsically ever-changing and fast-paced environment and nature of the digital world. It can't be, unfortunately, like as comprehensive as to include all these challenges. But I think what we can do, and I think the DSA proves that it's possible, is to try and make the law as future-proof as possible. And Prabhat didn't mention it, but there are also enormous amount of tools that also can be deployed by the Commission itself, by the set of regulators around the countries as well, that, you know, this legislation come with teeth as well. So again, shared enthusiasm, and to be continued. And I'm very happy that we have organized this event with Five Rights Foundation and other partners for the Intergroup on Children's Rights. And just to conclude that, you know, a high level of privacy, safety, and security for minors is actually been always at the core of all the work in the Intergroup, in all the resolutions as well, initiated by the Intergroup itself, and all the amendments. I always have this in mind as the core. Thank you so much.